Man to man, combat hand to hand, hands locked, ready for the last stand, elbow drops, kicks fade bang. If I connect you, levitate, better settle mate, lights out, knocked out by the heavyweight.
Hello, it's Toby from Heavyweight MMA with Ramona Pascual, Hong Kong's first female fighter in the UFC. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, good. So recently you had the first call up to UFC after fighting in a few different associations. How was it to get that call?
Yeah, it was definitely overwhelming because it was a week, I had a week's notice, but everything I dreamed of, for so long. It's definitely been such a big goal of mine, a life goal of mine. And to have gotten the call, sort of unexpectedly, was definitely a whirlwind, but obviously, couldn't be happier.
So it was unexpected. Was it your coach that suddenly just called you and said, we've got a fight for you in the UFC? And what was the feeling at that actual moment? Yeah,
we knew that I was probably going to get, if I was going to get an opportunity, it would have been late notice, because that's more or less how most people are getting into the UFC now, and just kind of stepping up, to cover for injuries or COVID and things like that. So we kind of had an idea that this was going to happen. And so in the meantime, I was still trying to build my record and, get more experience. I had a really strong feeling that it was definitely going to be this year. I had no idea when it was going to be. I was supposed to be on the Asia Contender Series. That was supposed to happen like 2 years ago. And then COVID happened. So then they had to push all that back. So that became, that then eliminated that route of getting in. And so being here in Vegas and sort of on standby and staying ready was kind of the other, route that I was going to take. And it worked out.
Cool. And you've fought on a few different promotions. I've written down a couple of IMPI, which is Vusi's promotion, right, in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Invicta, Road FC. How does it compare the UFC when you compare these different promotions?
Yeah, it's definitely very, very different. IMPI was local to Hong Kong, and it was great what Vusi did with that show, giving fighters the opportunity to compete in a region where MMA is not very developed and it's not super popular. So it was a very niche and small community. But, there was one time where he had, 3 to 4 shows a year, I think, over like a 2-year span, which was really cool, because then that really made people more interested to get into it. And eventually, as it is with small shows, it's really difficult financially, and there are a lot of different politics that go into it as well. And just the resources required to hold events like that on a consistent basis is very difficult. So, yeah. And then going on to, Road FC, and that was in Korea, where MMA is a lot more developed. So there was a lot more experience on their end, because they've been around for so long and they're still around. So that was going strong. And then coming over to the US, having gone to Mexico, and then the one Invicta over here where I made my US debut. Definitely different. It's like the more you fight, the more organization goes into it, the more planning, and like things like I was an example for the UFC, like fight week, all your meals are prepared, you have a schedule, you have like your photo shoot and this and media and whatever. Whereas like smaller shows, like you don't have that. You just show up, and you just have your mouthpiece and you get ready to fight. With this, it was like fitting with the like jersey and all those things. So it's cool to like be at that level of like a professional athlete, where like, you get treated like you would if you're a professional like basketball player or like, hockey player. Although MMA is very new and very young still, and there's a big discrepancy in a lot of different areas. It's just being at that level where it's taken very seriously, and you get a lot of support and resources that go into making sure that you're as successful as possible.
Getting a taste for it, it must make you really want to just get back there and try and stay in that organization, do your best to be there, right?
100%, because I would assume most people that get into MMA got into it because they watched the UFC, and there are people in the UFC that they really admire. So that's always the ultimate goal for so many of us. And obviously there are other promotions as well, but nothing quite like, you know, the branding that they've developed, and the following that they have behind them. So, and just the reach that they have globally. But yeah, like now that my foot is in the door, you know, there are a lot of circumstances that weren't ideal, but no excuses. I went into that fight thinking that I was going to win it, that I could have won it, and it didn't work out that way, unfortunately. But I'll be better set up for the next one. And yeah, I'm definitely really excited to make that splash.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had to lose 20 pounds in 1.5 weeks to make the weight. That's not the easiest cut, right? And then going up against a pretty formidable opponent, I would say, as a Josiane Nunes was her name, right? And yeah, she's tough, and she also has no neck, so it's going to be a difficult fight.
Yeah, she is tough. 100%. She has an amazing record. They were like, "You're going to be fighting this girl, 8-1. She's knocked out or TKO'd like her last 7 opponents." Like, and I was like, let's go. Like, I was so excited to be able to meet an opponent at such a high level that's so highly regarded. Also because for a personal reason, wanting to test myself, because, you know, I've been fighting for these other shows, and developing myself so much, you know, at the gym with all these high level training partners. So yeah, it was just exciting for me, the whole thing. Like, I loved it, you know, everything from, I mean, all I had was fight week to like all the preparation. So it wasn't, you know, all the contracts that I had to sign, the medicals, you know, getting linked up with USADA, doing these online like videos, and then like doing these quizzes and all these things that had to be in place. So it was a lot to like deal with in just a short span of time, but it was great. I like enjoyed all of it.
And your opponent, she's kind of a little bit one-dimensional, right? Like when you watch the fight, I think I mentioned to you in a message that I think you're a little bit better rounded, more well-rounded, but she's very strong, obviously, in the stand-up and particularly with the hands. How does it feel to, you know, probably in your mind, I mean, if I was you, I'd be thinking I could have won that fight because of my more well-rounded skills. Is that something that sort of crossed into your mind?
100%. She's a striker, and I brought her to the ground, and there wasn't so much there. Like, I thought there would have been more there. And she has this like vicious overhand, you know, and that's what she throws over and over again. She's very athletic, so she's very aware of distance as well. And she's also good with like knowing when to push and then when to kind of pull back and like stall a little bit and then when to push. So I credit her. Like, she's a great fighter, but I would agree, you know, it's kind of one dimensional. And so I felt like if I just had more in me to be more active on the ground and just gotten those takedowns early, it could have been a totally different result. So, you know, it's just one of those things you live and learn. And in the moment, at the end of it, I was like, there was nothing more I could have done. I left everything I had in there. But then, you know, after you've had a few weeks to really reflect and look at all the things that you did wrong, all your mistakes are really seared into your mind, you know, not the same way the mistakes in the gym are seared into your mind. So I just have such a better understanding of what I need to do and what I need to address for the next one. And just being able to be in there, comfortable, hear my coaches in my corner, and just enjoy that moment, you know. Like, it was definitely tiring. It went 15 minutes, and that was actually my first 15-minute fight. So that was also good to like know that I like went through that whole thing. But yeah, it definitely makes me hungrier and more excited for the next one.
Yeah, and you, I can't remember, you posted or I saw something and you're in hospital afterwards with morphine. So you got a bit beat up in the fight. What were your sort of injuries after that? Like, what were you in there for?
I think it just looked bad, but actually I didn't have any injuries at all. It was just soft tissue. So it was just like a lot of swelling, a lot of bruising, which looked like, you know, because she literally hit me in the same spot over and over again. At no point did I feel like I was like rocked and like couldn't continue, you know. Like, she'd hit me and she hits hard, but I just I kind of just was like, all right, I got hit again. I got hit again, and I could like keep going. So it just looked bad, and then the doctors didn't really know. They thought it might have been a fracture orbital in my nose or something, and so they like sent me to the hospital. And obviously in the ambulance, they don't know what's wrong, and they're like, well, maybe we should, help you with like, they don't know how much pain I'm in. And it ended up being like nothing. Like CT scan is clear, like no issues, no breaks, nothing. It was just swelling that came down in a week. So within a week, I was looking normal again.
That's good. That's good. Hey, before you mentioned about your background with your family speaking Hokkien and Mandarin. So your family's from where in China originally?
Quanzhou, so southern
Yep.
China.
And sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, so they migrated to the Philippines, and then that's where my parents were born and raised, and then they migrated to Hong Kong.
Okay, so you're actually born in Hong Kong then?
I was born actually in San Francisco, but I never quite lived there, and I've pretty much been in Hong Kong like ever since. So I grew up there like my whole life, more or less, was in Hong Kong.
And how did you like it? You've originally mentioned that you've done rugby and Muay Thai to begin with. What drove you to be in such physical sports? Because living in the region, I'm in Macau, and I spent a bit of time in Hong Kong. It doesn't seem to be really natural for, I would say, for ladies or women to be involved in physical contact type sports.
Yeah, I guess I was a tomboy growing up for sure. I had two brothers, so there's a lot of rough housing. And I always really admired that they got to do all the cool things like run around and like play sports and all that. And I just really wanted to get involved. And that was fun for me. And I think growing up, just being really insecure, lacking confidence, and then wanting to do something that helped me, gain that confidence and get out of my shell. And that was sport, because it just allowed me to not have to speak. I hated like interacting with people. I was just like awkward, and all I want to do is there's this game, and there's like a goal to like get more points, as many points as you can. And I love the physical aspect of it. I love that it was difficult, but I also love the feeling that you got afterwards. And so that, I think, is what continuously drew me towards sport. And so it was basketball in high school, and then picked up rugby because that was big within the international school circuit. And then after that, Muay Thai, because I was always fascinated by martial arts. Didn't ever want to fight. I just did it for fun. It was a great workout. And then eventually, I'd been doing it long enough. I'd met some professional fighters who I really admired. And I thought, well, these people are actually really nice people, really cool, really inspiring. And maybe I can give this a go. And then that's kind of how it all began.
Yeah, Hong Kong, like it's got quite a big history of martial arts there, right? And if I was to think of what you would probably start in Hong Kong, people would probably imagine you'd start in something like Wing Chun or some type of Kung Fu, right? But they have everything there, right? Like there's so many different types of associations and clubs, etc. there that are training different martial arts. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how did you actually end up in Muay Thai rather than something like Kung Fu or anything else?
I think like the idea, so I did Taekwondo when I was a kid, but I didn't do it for very long. And I really liked it. But, then I got into like other team sports. And then I think it was like 2005 when kickboxing became this workout thing where it's like, oh, well, like so many women started to do it. And it was like, oh, get fit and like get to punch and kick things. And I think my parents at the time were like, oh, we don't want her to box because then she's going to like have to get into fights and things like that. And so when it became like more of like a fitness wellness kind of thing, then they were like, okay, yeah, we can like put you in that. And then I just like fell in love with it. And, that's all I did it for. I did it for fitness. I did it to push myself. I did it because it was difficult. And it wasn't until like 4 years later, after I graduated college, that I was like, well, yeah, maybe I want to give this fighting thing a go. And obviously Hong Kong being so close to Thailand, having so many Thai trainers living in Hong Kong, being able to, teach and spread Muay Thai to the people in Hong Kong, it was just very accessible for me to go over to Thailand for a weekend, like fight, or like go over there and train.
Yeah, it's Thai boxing in this sort of region is kind of interesting because it seems to be linked to like the triads and that as well? Like it's kind of underworld, right? Like in Macau anyway, there's little dodgy gyms that aren't commercial gyms. They're like just hidden in industrial buildings, and these Thai trainers used to be bought out by some of the triad guys just to train bodyguards and that, and or to be bodyguards themselves. And it's kind of like that in Hong Kong as well, right? Like there's a mixture between, you've got those commercial gyms, right, that are just making money, but there's also that little bit of a triad underworld element to the Thai boxing and the shows and everything, right?
Yeah, that's definitely what the word that goes around for sure.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, and they've had some really good people over through the years in Hong Kong and in Macau teaching that are ex champions in Lumpini and Rajadamnern as well. So it's interesting the way it flows over to Hong Kong and Macau.
Yeah,
Thai boxing.
Yeah,
and actually
a lot of great coaches.
True, and the Thai boxing is something not everyone knows. Is the Thai boxing in Hong Kong and in the really early days is what then transferred to New Zealand and then started up the original gyms that started up before CKB. The coaches came from Balmoral Liga, which came from Sifu Philip Lam, who was from Hong Kong, and he saw Thai boxing and took it to New Zealand. So it's kind of cool. The Thai boxing in Hong Kong's influenced the people that now are out in the UFC, like Israel Adesanya, etc. So it's kind of cool. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
That's it. So in the Hong Kong scene as well, I noticed that you have some mutual acquaintances on Facebook, like Rodrigo Corporal and Daniel Charles and these guys. Did you train with these guys at Epic? Is that where you train with them?
Yeah. So Daniel Charles, like we trained, he was one of the black belts at Epic. There were like 4 of them. I think throughout the 4 years they were in operation, there might've been 6 that have come through, or even more than that. And so I trained with them, and then I switched over when they closed. I switched over to Espada, where Caporal teaches. And so whenever I go back home, that's kind of the gym that I train martial arts at, because MMA is not really big there. Like you don't have big groups training MMA. So I definitely take the opportunity to focus on my jiu-jitsu game when I'm back there. And that's always a good time because they're such a strong team. They're very competitive. Caporal is a very competitive guy himself. So he brings a lot of that to his students, and it's always really good classes to be taking.
Yeah. So anyone that's listening that doesn't know, Rodrigo Corporal is an ADOS affiliate. And then, our gym actually in Macau is affiliated with Rodrigo as well.
Okay. ADOS Macau, yeah.
Guys over there, but I train with them as well. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, linked up.
Fantastic.
Also, I remember early days over there was Quinton. Do you know Quinton from
yes.
Versus Performance?
Oh yeah.
You know Quinton more?
Yeah. Because I would go to so when I first started my MMA career, I would actually be training at Versus because they had like, I would say at the time, like the biggest MMA team, just because like other guys from other gyms would come together and there'd be like a pro practice in the afternoon. I mean, when I first started my career, the first 2 years, I'd be training over there, and Quinton's an awesome guy too.
Yeah, true. Actually, when I first came over to Macau, which was an age ago, it was like 15 years ago, I wanted to fight MMA. I'd always fought stand up, and I'd go over there on the weekends and train. And then I went to a session and I broke my fibula and just kind of put an end to my training over there because it took a while to heal.
Oh no!
I got back to it. Yeah, so I ended my ideas, my aspirations.
That was MMA.
It was training MMA, but I'd only fought stand up. I was thinking who to train with that can teach me some MMA, and I was training it Versus a little bit on the weekends.
Got it.
Yeah, and just in training, copped a bad kick. It was my own fault. I was going too strong with a guy that was much bigger than me, and
oh no.
Anyway, it is what it is. Yeah. So speaking of gyms, you've trained in many gyms in different countries. Epic, currently in Syndicate in the US. You've trained in Korea for a period of time. China UFC. You mentioned that you've also gone to where was it? Phuket as well. So many different gyms, so many different styles. Can you talk a bit on the differences between the gyms and like what do you value in a gym now after being across these different countries?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned so much in every single place that I've been to. And it's like each place that I go to prepares me for the next place. And it kind of just keeps evolving like that. And it's always good to like go to a new team, go to a new gym, and a place where you're not familiar with, where you can get to be a little uncomfortable, and you step through the door, and you have people that have been there a long time, and you have to sort of prove yourself, and you know prove that you're a good training partner, that you're a value to the team, and also just pick the brain of like all these incredible coaches, that have been in the sport for so long, that have studied the sport, and have looked at it so many different ways for so many years. Yeah, I mean, some, like, for example, in Phuket, like at the time, this is pre-COVID, those gyms were massive, just so many people going through there. But that was more of like, they had their core team, but also so many people visiting from out of town, all different levels, all different promotions. So the energy in a room of like, I don't know, but it was busy, like 80 people, obviously, is like amazing. But it's also difficult to teach in a room of 80 people, So there's kind of that, but great, obviously. Like, I always meet amazing people because you're on the same path. Like, you instantly have that in common, and then you share a good round, and you tell each other where you're from. And I think that's been the biggest thing that MMA has given me, is just access and connection to people that I would never have met had I stayed in Hong Kong and done, whatever else that I would have done if I hadn't fought. And then getting to the Shanghai PI, where everything was so structured, where, the program was all set out, like when we were going to train, when we were going to rest, do recovery, do PT, do our testing, all that stuff. And gaining a lot of insight into how to be a professional athlete there and what goes into it. And then coming here to Vegas, where, we still have access to the PI, but it's more like I need to self-regulate. So I learn a lot I get to take what I learned from Shanghai over here. And now I just have a lot more girls than I've ever had to train with, and also like who are similar size, and some like bigger than me even, which never happened in Asia. I was always the biggest girl. So yeah, I'm like quite settled here. I absolutely love it. I don't see myself going anywhere else, until the end of my career. Like, I'm probably just going to see the rest of my career out here.
Yeah, it's the place to be, right? And yeah, talking to a few of the successful fighters and guys that are really embedded in the martial arts lifestyle, and that one of the biggest takeaways for them is that what you've kind of done, which is the travel. Most of them are just traveling for fights and a little bit of training, and then the second one is like meeting so many cool people, like as you mentioned, at these different places, different type of people. And then what you've done is putting yourself in kind of uncomfortable situations, right? Which leads to personal growth and everything, and feeling of accomplishment, right? Like going here, going there, fitting in, and, showing your worth, and then moving somewhere else. Like it sort of shows you got a decent, strong character, right? And you accepting challenges and, self-growth and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to think so. I don't know. But if you had asked me, like when I was still in Hong Kong, and you told me that this is how my career is going to go, and I would be going to Korea, and then I'd be going to Thailand, and then I'd be going to Shanghai, and then I'd be going to Vegas, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have been like, that's too much. I didn't even think that I was going to do it for longer than 2 years, to be honest. But I think it's never really a plan to be like, I'm just going to keep getting bigger, 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 and like keep climbing up the ladder. You just sort of, wherever you're at, you just make the most of it, and you just keep learning, and you keep growing. And then all of a sudden, like an opportunity just appears, and it's kind of that decision of, ooh, do I take it? And usually it's pretty obvious, what the opportunity is, if it's a good one. And then you kind of like jump onto that. And then like, COVID happens, and then you have to like pivot, and then this happens. And then you pretty much end up where you're supposed to be. But then if you can kind of stay open-minded and, and accept change and kind of flow along with it, then usually it works out for the best, and you get the most out of it.
Yeah. Do you feel like your identity, where does your identity sort of lay now? Like, having worked overseas for a while, I'm kind of like stuck in the middle somewhere. Like,
yeah,
I'm Australian, but I've lived over in China for so long that this is not my home. Australia doesn't feel like my home. Like, what am I? It's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah. Well, I think I've always felt like that. Like, my whole life because I'm, I was in the international school system, and it's like my parents are not from Hong Kong. They're from the Philippines, but they're both Chinese. And so there was this like, already this sort of crossroads of like Philippine culture and Chinese culture. And then they moved to Hong Kong. And so it became this like, okay, well, we're like back in China, but then it's Hong Kong, which is like very different part of China. And going to international schools, and it's like there's that international community where you feel like a third culture kid because I'm a part of all these different cultures, because obviously like I'm westernized as well. And I wouldn't say that I truly fit in with like a local Hong Kong person or a local Chinese person or a local Filipino, so and I wouldn't say that I'm like truly American either, it's like, because I still have so many like things that I carry with me culturally that are so, what my parents passed on to me. So yeah, I felt like that my whole life, just not really belonging anywhere, and I think that might have been the thing that kind of allowed me to just leave, because I'm all these different cultures, and why don't I go to this new place or do this new thing? I actually never thought of it like that, but yeah, that might have been why I kind of not necessarily found comfort in like moving all over the place, but sort
You're
of
not too
felt
attached, right? You're not too
enthusiastic.
attached to something. You're not embedded in that sort
Yeah,
of culture. So yeah,
felt
it
like,
allows you to be more
and
open to other things, maybe.
sure, yeah, like enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, but you sound like you found a bit of a home now, anyway. So maybe that'll grow on you, and you won't really be going around as much. But
Yeah,
hopefully, your fighting will give you the opportunity to travel on another level and just be traveling for fighting and that. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
So working over at Syndicate, obviously you've got a few famous people around. From there and anywhere else, where are the sort of like the stars that you've sort of worked with, or you've been around in the gyms? I saw a photo the other day with I think it looked like Cowboy was in the corner of a photo that you were in the other day. Was that
Oh
Cowboy?
yeah,
No.
yeah. It was his birthday yesterday, so it was yeah, it was good. He was at sparring, so he comes every so often when he's in town. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people come through there, personally, like Joanne Calderwood,
Yeah.
Joanne Wood is one of my main
Mhm.
training partners.
Yeah.
So
How did she
I
feel
see her all
after
the
her
time.
loss the other day?
Oh, obviously heartbroken,
Yeah.
all of us were, and it definitely a very tough pill to swallow, as you can imagine. But I have to give her a lot of credit for being able to overcome that. And, I spoke to her today. She was at the gym and, kind of fresh off of the weekend.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm okay. And I think that takes a lot of practice and a lot of awareness to be able to be like, yeah, everything's
Yeah.
okay.
I actually picked her
So
to be the winner
she's,
of that fight. We did a bit of an analysis of that fight
I mean,
beforehand, and I picked her just having
yeah.
all around stand up skills. I thought she would have actually. She did a few of the things that I mentioned. Just yeah, it's fight game, so it can go either way, right?
Yeah. I mean, at her best, like this was her fight to win, but she did have a tear in her quad that was like a big one. So she hadn't been training any ground at all for like the past 3 weeks. And so it sort of was like, yeah, she got to the ground and then like there was hesitation. And at that level, when you're fighting the best in the world, there's just no allowance to like hesitate because of you're compromised a certain way. So that was a tough one to get through, but she's gonna be fine. She's gonna be stronger for it. Yeah, I would say like Roxanne was there,
Yeah.
like she's retired now and I see her all the time. We had Norma Dumont, and I'm just kind of she was kind of one of the main girls that I would train with. Phenomenal fighter.
Yeah.
We've got Jenna Fabian, who's there right now. She's PFL.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jenna
and like
from CKB originally as well, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've
I
interviewed
love that
heaps of the
girl.
guys, and actually, I almost interviewed her, but just the schedules haven't matched up yet. So one day.
She's fantastic.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys, like Khalil Roundtree, A lot of new signs as well, who, you know, the first year I was here, there were like 3 guys that signed to UFC, or maybe even 4. So then seeing them get picked up, I was like, well, this is a place to be, you know, like all of them were short notice, because, you know, all the fights at the Apex, it's like, who are they going to call? If they got somebody they need to replace, they don't have to pay for airfare, they don't have to pay, you know, do all that, just, you know, down the street, like, give us a call. But yeah, it's honestly such an honor and privilege to be able to be in the same room as all these people.
That's it. And obviously you've moved, I imagine moving from Hong Kong, etc. You know, you've seen the development, the different places that do different sort of, you know, the 1% things that give you that little small edge, whether it be strength and conditioning, different ideas on rest and recovery, you know, diet, etc. Where are you at now over there, and what sort of things do you think really help you, like in those sort of aspects?
I would say consistency is everything, but also being kind to yourself if you slip up on anything, and also listening to your body, because I think, I mean, fighters, like, it's in our nature to just push hard, and like in the moment, just like our ego is just like inflated, we just go for it, and oftentimes that leads to injury, you know, overtraining and like things like that. So yeah, I would say really understanding yourself as, like, you know, sounds like very cerebral, but like it's not, you know, you can have like the best strength conditioning, you can have like the best coaches and like know all the techniques in the world, you can have like, you know, great physio and like have your nutrition on point, but if like you lack the confidence in yourself to be able to live this kind of lifestyle, or like pull the trigger when it counts, you're just going to get stuck and you won't be able to access all the resources that you have. So I think a lot of it comes down to your relationship with yourself, the confidence that you have in yourself and your ability to be successful, you know, because all these unnecessary stresses, like MMA is a stressful sport. And it's the most stressful job to wake up every morning and be like, I'm going to get punched and kicked and like wrestled to the end of, you know, to the end of my capacity, and like I'm going to hit my limit all the time. And you have that anxiety of like, oh, and I need to do well, I need to make sure, you know, this and that, this is in order, and I have to make sure my sleep, it's like, it's also stressful already. And if you're like overly stressing yourself even more with other things that shouldn't be stressing you out, if you have a bad relationship, if like you're, you know, not confident in yourself, if you're, this thing's not going right in your life, that thing not going right, it's all going to bleed into your performance and your ability to recover. And also like being able to regulate your stress levels, down regulate and deal with them, you know, is also important. And like knowing when to take a day off, that's also super important. I struggle with that all the time. So yeah, I would say the sport really, because it's so demanding, it requires you to develop that relationship with yourself. And I think that ultimately is the 1%, because if you know what you're supposed to do and you know what you're capable of doing and you know what you need to do to get there, and you don't worry about the things that are out of your control, increases your probability of being successful. Obviously it doesn't guarantee it, but you're always just going to want to rely on the things that you can do. So that's your effort. And then hopefully the results, you know, come. Maybe they won't. But I think ultimately, if you look at everything with a wide lens, you know, you're winning. If you're learning, you're winning ultimately. And whatever it is that you choose to do after this short career is over, you'll only be successful being able to bring all those tools into that next chapter.
Yeah. You just mentioned a minute ago about the stress of it and you know, going in to get punched and kicked and wrestled every day. You reminded me of another, I think it was an interview. Of yours. You got hundreds of interviews, by the way. So I'm trying not to jump onto the really normal topics because they're like you've just had heaps.
Yeah,
of
no, that's all right.
You mentioned about in one of those ones about getting beaten up a couple of times a week, and you also mentioned about that being a small fish, a big fish in a small pond. Now you're more of a small fish in a big pond. It's kind of massive dynamic change, right? How does that feel on the ego and everything? It must be a little bit difficult at first. Some people wouldn't be able to handle that, you know?
Yeah, I think you'll always doubt yourself. You will always doubt yourself more than anyone will doubt you. You know, you're always going to put more pressure than yourself than anyone else possibly could. So I think that inherently comes with, you know, wanting to be really good at something and then being afraid to fail. And then being worried that if you put yourself in this new environment that you understand to be a really good environment, but also incredibly challenging, that also then addresses your fear of not being good enough. Because am I going to move to Vegas, train with one of the best MMA teams in the world, where all these high level athletes go? And will I then have my question answered in a negative way and come back at me as, actually, you can't even hang with these people. Like, you're not good enough for the global level. But then there's also another side of me that's like, well, we have to know. Like, we have to know. And there's never at a point where I was like, oh yeah, I'll be fine out there. Like, I'll totally go in there and like, I want to be part of the team and I'm going to assimilate really well. And then I'm going to be a great training partner that everyone wants to train with. And, you know, I'm going to build all these relationships. Like, it was never that. My mind never went there. It was all just doubt. Like, how terrible is it going to be if I totally suck when I get there, you know? And like, I'm finally in America where I have to compete with all these girls that grew up here, were developed here, where MMA was born. Whereas I'm over in Asia, I'm coming over from, you know, Hong Kong, where we have Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu, like no MMA, like just no support for this kind of thing. Don't even have an amateur league to make your mistakes. I had to go straight into pro and like make my mistakes there. And yeah, it all just came down to that. It was like, well, you have all this self-doubt. And so you're like, oh yeah, maybe I'll like hesitate. But then eventually you just also look at the clock, right? And you're like, well, I'm not getting any younger. And if this is truly what I want to do, then it's worth it to go and totally fail and fall flat on my face and at least know and at least have gotten a taste of it than to just sit back and stay where I was and never know, and also just have in the back of my mind for the rest of my life wondering what could have been.
That sounds good. That's the fighter's mentality, right? Even from the amateur level, you know, for that decision to go and have a fight is a daunting one, but you have to do it if you really want to test yourself. And then you're just taking that to the extreme, right? Do I have what it takes to be world level UFC fighter or not? And you're still putting yourself through that test. So it's very, very admirable that you're putting yourself through that and really testing yourself, really pushing yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's also not just, it's like, yeah, fighting UFC or fighting like high level people. But if you go to a gym that's like massive, like Syndicate is, with all these high level, you know, fighters, like it's every day is like a fight. You know, not that we go hard and we're like knocking each other out, but every day is like, I need to bring my A game, because if I don't bring my A game, there are all these killers in there that are going to show me up, you know? And so that automatically, like, you have to make sure everything else in your life is like in order. And,
Yeah.
you know, you're getting the right sleep, nutrition, like stress levels, the people that you interact with, you know, their relationships. And so that's a challenge in itself for me. Like, I find if I have a good week, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I like win, you know, my rounds, like it just means I got through it injury free.
Yep.
And I learned a lot. And usually that comes from like getting, you know, beat up a little bit, which happens all the time, which, you know, and then just reframing that as being something that is, I'm so grateful for, to have access to all these people that are really going to push me and have helped me develop so much in such a short period of time.
It's interesting. You said you got to bring your A game. Just interviewed Dan Hooker recently, and he's saying he has to bring his A game. If he doesn't bring his A game to the gym, he'll have amateurs smashing him, you know, because there's just such a strength in the numbers there, and the same where you're at as well, right? Like even the lower people are killers as well. So you got to bring your A game all the time.
Everyone's hungry.
That's it. That's it. Hey, something I've been asking people lately is kind of, I feel like MMA is a very, it's a difficult, very physical type of sport. So you're really in touch with your body. You're really in touch with training and the needs of training. And I think people can learn from that. So do you have any sort of tips, you touched on a little bit, but tips about people that are just general people that are training, like how to, I don't know, how to keep training, how to, if they want to do martial arts, etc., if they want to be healthy, what sort of things would you sort of recommend, or what sort of guidance would you give someone?
I think if you're looking to start out, like say if you're a fan of MMA and you want to get into it, and this is like what I did, like just when I was like a teenager, like do research and try to find like a local gym near you. Everything's online these days. You can see a lot of reviews. You can see what people are talking about. And if you have a friend that goes there, and I would say if you have a lot of options, like this is a question that I get asked a lot for people in Hong Kong, like which jiu-jitsu gym should I train at, or which gym, whatever. And it's like, well, it depends on what you're looking for. Different gyms are strong in different disciplines. But if you really have no idea what you want to get into, maybe it's Muay Thai, maybe it's jiu-jitsu, I would say just try, like go to a place, see if you like the people there. Like, I feel like once you enter a room, you get an idea of like a place, right? Like the vibe of a place, of like the people, how they greet you, what it feels like, what it smells like, what it looks like, have the class, how the instructor is, how your training partners are. There's so many things there that can help you, that are like really important factors in deciding what kind of place is best for you to truly develop, and for you to be yourself and be comfortable, and not be afraid of making mistakes, and have the right guidance. And I would say just that's the first thing you do, because if you end up going to a place, even though it's maybe popular, or is like highly regarded, but you don't like the people that you train with, or like you get a not a good vibe with the coach or whatever, then you're just gonna not go consistently. Like the main thing, if you're gonna want to get good at something, you have to make it as easy as possible to show up. And so if you enjoy the people that you're with, and the people that you're learning from, and the environment, and if it's convenient to get to, that's also important. Then you're more likely to stick to it and be able to develop that way. And yeah, I think then from then on, you just kind of see what you get into, see what you like. And then it shouldn't be really too difficult to show up every day to do something that you really enjoy.
Yep. And then any words on like how you deal with in keeping motivated and keeping consistent?
So motivation will only last so long, because you're going to get to a point where you're just exhausted and you're overtrained and you've been doing this for too long and you need a break. And burnout is like, ever so present, especially in sports where, you show up to the same place. It's like work, right? You show up to the same room in, more or less the same people. And then you're just working hard, and like every day might be a little slightly different, but like generally the structure is similar. So I mean, at that point, like you just have to kind of know. It's easier as a competitor because I know like I'm there to fight. And so I want to learn as much as I can so that I can be effective when it comes time for me to get into octagon to whoever I'm facing. For someone that isn't a competitor, it's a bit more different if you're like recreational. So then you have to look at what your goals are. Is it, to stay fit? Is it to be strong? Is it to, progress another belt level or something? But something like jujitsu, I really like, and I will always encourage people to train that over anything else. I mean, Muay Thai is awesome, and that was my first passion. And if you're really into like, drilling and that kind of thing, and like the art with like head movement, footwork, and all that, like absolutely do that. But I feel like if I had to pick one discipline, and it wouldn't be wrestling, jujitsu would be the one that I would probably do like forever, for as long as I can. Because there's just something about being, first of all, it's no contact, so you're not getting any head injuries. I feel like injuries are minimal if you can be smart about it. Also, you can tap at any point, like you feel like, oh, I'm about to get injured or anything like that. And you can dictate the pace with your partner. And, you know, flow rolling is always like so much fun because you get to be creative and you get to push yourself, but you also get to play. And so, yeah, given that it's no contact, it's also less of a risk to compete in jiu-jitsu, which I feel like is the most accessible martial art out there for anyone to compete in. So, you know, that's also a good thing. Of like, maybe you're, you know, into MMA, but obviously no one's going to just jump into competing in MMA. And I don't think MMA is for everyone, but I feel like jiu-jitsu is like pretty welcoming for like all kinds of body types and all kinds of, you know, different sizes, different athletic levels, and
different ages
that's the
too,
one
right? Like
thing.
you can train it from when you're a
Right.
little kid all the way through to you're you know, a very old person, as long as you, like you said, you pay attention to your body and you're careful, like you could do it
Yeah.
forever. So yeah, and it's
Because
a
it's
good
like
self-defense art too, right?
self-defense. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. On to the last sort of question I had. You mentioned plans for 2022 ideally was to have 2 more fights. Anything on the cards, or that's still what you're hoping for?
I think they're probably like booking for July right now. So I'm hoping it won't be any later than July, but you know, we'll have to see. I mean, there's so many fighters on the roster right now, and I think that, you know, they're kind of like overwhelmed with like trying to get people in, and understandable. So yeah, in the meantime, I'm just, you know, staying injury free, continue with training. Like if something comes up relatively short notice, like not like a week, obviously, but like relatively, you know, if someone's like, you know, we want to fill this slot and I'm available, then I would definitely jump on that, you know, especially because the Apex is right here. So it just makes sense. But yeah, hopefully once in the summer and then hopefully before the year's up.
After on that subject, after the last one, are you trying to keep the weight lower just in case you have to jump in last
100%.
minute? Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Because I just fought Invicta the month before. And I'd kind of been in fight camp for like, I don't know, 9 months already. Because it was like, oh, there might be a fight here. There might be a fight here. And then, you know, when you're sort of fighting like more regional shows, like you get a shorter notice period. And so I was kind of going from like, oh, might be fighting 3 weeks. Oh, maybe it's 4. And then like, oh, that fell through. Like, oh, you might be fighting this one. So I felt like I just was constantly in camp. And so after I fought that in January, I was like, well, all right, I'm going to take my first holiday I've taken in 2 weeks or 2 years. And I just did absolutely, usually when I go on holiday, like I bring my workout kit, you know, everything. But I was like, no, I'm just going to literally do nothing and just relax. And so I went for that, and I was like coming back, and I think I'd been back for like 2-3 weeks. And then it was like, all right, you might be fighting, like this is going to happen. And then, so then, you know, I was definitely well rested, but it was also like not fight camp ready. So, you know, for sure this next one is going to be better.
Cool. And ideally, what's your, you know, future pinnacle in your career? What are you focused on for a future?
In MMA, I definitely want to break into, you know, I want to be a contender. I want to break in the top 10. I want to break in the top 5. Like I want to be there. I want to be there with the best in the world. I want to see what happens. And I just want to get as many dances as I can get in before I wrap this up. So yeah, I just want to stay active. I want to keep developing, you know, push myself further than I ever thought possible and see where that lands me.
Awesome. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ramona, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate giving me the time to have a talk and about everything. It's really good. And best of luck with reaching those goals. I'll be paying attention and I'll keep in touch with you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Toby.
Cool. Thank you.